Hey everyone, it is the one and only Economancer. Today I'm bringing you an interview with a friend of mine. His name is Dustin. He is a master's student working in sociology with a background in affect control theory, social identity theory, and a little bit of social exchange theory. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Because I think he may be able to tell us better. So please, Dustin, take it away.
Oh, hey. So, yeah, my name's Dustin, and I've actually accepted a position at UNCC as a graduate student here in the master's program in sociology. My research interest is interaction with humans and non-humans, or particularly the AI phenomenon that's going on in our world today. I use utilizing ACT or affect control theory. It's been kind of a ride for me. I started in my undergraduate with virtual studies, and I hope to continue that as I go on through my graduate studies. Thank you.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. So you said your background is really the interaction with artificial intelligence and humans. So what does that kind of mean for society as is right now? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so the majority of our interactions with an AI is through the tools that we have. It's our devices, it's our phones, Alexa, Amazon, these things that are in our homes that we tell to, we give commands and we have responses that require from them. Uh, Mostly it's our phones, our GPSs, or even our cars. If you have like the new Teslas and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's jump into this. The first question I've got to ask, all right, so what when we're thinking about affect control theory, right? So that's essentially how people maintain the meanings through their actions and kind of how they interpret events and stuff, right?
Right.
So what is the application here when it comes to artificial intelligence? Are we looking at how artificial intelligence affects our view of the world, or is it how we view artificial intelligence?
Right. So we follow. This is kind of getting a little. Will be a little mathy at this first part because what we have is a linear equation essentially, where we have a stable sediment of our what a virtual assistant is or what an AI is in general, and then we have the generalized statement of the behavior that we expect from them when we give them a command. Right. And then we have the outcome is the predicted impression uh, of the AI. Now we look at this in the sense not in a way of like me and you interacting in a recursive manner where I say something and then you say something back in a model of communication, but we have models of interaction with AI, which is we have a model that we understand the outcome, and then we judge the AI success based on how that model should work of our preconception. The AI doesn't actually have any place in this interaction as of yet. They don't have the ability to judge our behaviors more than just understanding the task that we've given to them.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So I am familiar with a little bit of AI stuff when it comes to sentiment and content analysis. I'm
Mhm.
not sure if you're familiar with that, right? So to those out there, sentiment analysis is something like it's going to go through this article written by this person, and the AI is going to pick out three types of words: positive, negative, neutral. And it's going to go through this and it's going to label whether this article was negative or positive. You're really not going to find a neutral because depending on what type of dictionary or lectionary you're going to use, it's going to get rid of the neutrality anyway.
Mhm.
And so what you're saying so let me see if I can parse this in. So you have this idea where you're looking at how the AI, how this predicted component with this model of communication is, and the AI doesn't really take a stance on what we say to it. It more along the lines just reacts and tries to predict back to us, correct?
Right. So yeah, anything that we expect from the model is something that we've put into the AI. So when you're talking about the positive, negative, or neutral, that is on us our sentiments and our meaning and culture as
Yeah.
to what we define as those outcomes. And so the AI just says, you want me to say what this is? You want me to say what this is? And it just works through that process. And as long as we understand the model, we can trust the outcome that the AI gives us.
Okay. Well, one of the big problems I'd had with a lot of the sentiment analysis in the dictionaries that they have is that even if you had like 100% outcome based ratios, right, you're still missing like anywhere from 20 to 80% of individual sentimentality, right? And that's because humans vary so broadly that maybe the initial coder or the background text base for it, so the coder reliability that's built into it, you're going to capture some of that. But when you take it to broad audiences, the variance is just going to go haywire. And so it's really hard to do that. I think that's really interesting. So is that kind of an idea of about some of the work that you've been doing? Because I know it's broad.
Yeah, that's why we're using ACT, the effect control theory, because it's culturally based. So anything that the actor does and any judgments that we do on the behavior of the AI are solely based on the culture which we're studying. So, like you were saying, it's very influenced by the coder. So, if the coder grows up in a Western or Western society or a different society out abroad, that coding will be different and that evaluation would be different based on the culture that it's being evaluated by.
Okay. All right. So let's jump into the next part because I'm curious about this.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So we have this social exchange theory. Now, how is this social exchange theory getting built into this model of this artificial intelligence and how we're interacting with it?
Right. So there was a study done by Jacobi et al. In 2021, which argued that trust builds positive interactions, and that further trust attainment will give better interactions down the road. Now, the social exchange theory already says that. Now, Javosi is not actually a social scientist. They're economists, right? So they're not looking at it. They used a little bit
Hold
of a
on,
social
time out,
theory.
time out, time out.
Yeah,
Are you saying are you saying that economists aren't social scientists?
I'm saying that they're not sociologists. They do
Okay,
study
okay.
social things, but they don't. Like, for instance, in his own paper, they said, like, we're not going to use sociology, but we're going to use sociology, right, to just define trust. And so they distance themselves from sociology in their own term.
Oh, fair
Um,
enough. Fair
but
enough.
but they use social exchange theory in the sense that when you have a positive exchange and you have a positive outcome from that exchange, you're going to have positive emotions and positive feelings towards what gave you that exchange. Not so much as that the exchange was good, it's that the actors in the exchange were positive. And so you start to trust those things that give you positive feedback and those things that give you positive outcomes. And that's what AI essentially do as partners in the exchange. As long as we understand the model, which is I say something to the AI, it gives me what I want. And when it does that, I trust the AI that it's going to act in regards to that model. And that's really the basis of the social exchange theory in this instance.
Okay, so now I guess this kind of raises the question when we talk about trust. So there's really two types of trust here, right? There's the trust for the person who built the AI and what it's trying to compose and what it's trying to output. And then we have trust of the AI itself. So let's be a little conspiratorial, right? So
Okay.
should we trust an AI created by someone who's malevolent or nefarious? And second, should we trust AI in its own regard? I mean, sure, if we program it to do something very specific, but I mean, should we be worried about AI in the future? And I know that's, a fun question, so we'll just hit it.
Yeah, going into fun statements like that, definitely any trust that we have is anthropomorphized onto the AI because it can't act as a trustful actor in any regard, untrusting or trusting. So anything that we do that gives it trust is something that we have to decide to give to the AI. So I think that to your first point, do we trust the actual developers of the AI is something that's important to look at. I think that's something that we should study more. If there's actually a feeling of interaction that comes from, say, I own an Apple, therefore I trust Apple AI or Android, Samsung, whichever one you want to pick. As far as actors as malevolence, I think I'll go with Elon Musk on this one. He's quoted as saying that AI won't actually have any malevolence because, in a way that he said it was this: is if we're building a road as humans, we don't actually care about the ants at all. It's not our intent to destroy the ants when we're building a new road, but in our actions as a higher state of being, the ants are casualties in our desires. So I think would be more if they were off the hook and they did whatever they want. That's my feeling, is that they would become more of this. Humans are a casualty of their desires. That's
Okay.
way outside the box of my study, but
No,
that's
no. I think that's super interesting. The reason I bring it up is so we kind of had an idea earlier about discussing a lot of what Musk says, because apparently everybody loves to talk about Musk. He is the
he's a popular
new
guy right now.
right. He's the new right wing trad king, even though he's like not trad at all, and
Right.
it's kind of strange. But I give the devil his due when it comes to him. So now, thinking about this reminds me a lot of Hannah Arendt. I don't know if you've ever read any of her work on totalitarianism, right?
Yeah.
She has this statement about the banality of evil. So many people think that evil is this malevolent force, but in fact, it could be this boring, like you said, it's just we don't care about the ants, not because we don't care, but because they're so far below the totem pole that it doesn't even dawn on us to care about them, right?
Right.
So would AI have this? Would AI look at us and go, I am superior to you to such an extent that I don't even care about you? Or would it be something like, excuse me, humans and other more closely related animals, such as like dogs and cats and stuff like that, where we have to protect them almost, even though
Yeah.
we know that they're fine?
Well, I think the sentimentality that we would put on the AI is something that we feel like they should have because we have it. As conscious beings, we would expect that some sentimentality towards, oh, we have zoos because we want to protect animals or we want to, see the animals. But in all in all instances of AI, we're just not needed. As much as we like to think about, the matrix and we're these batteries for the AI, and so we're kind of harvested in that sense, going way off the wire. But that's like, I think as far as like a conscious being sent out of the AI and having it develop its own consciousness and its own society and civilization coming from us, I think we would be seeing no more than just instruments in its path of its own development.
Okay. Um, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think
It's a scary thought.
well, yeah, it is, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of Warhammer 40K. I don't know if you're familiar with it, right?
I've seen
So
it, yeah.
yeah, the dawn of the dawn of the golden age and the golden man, right? So that's the AI that's running everything, and humans are just existing. And then the AI goes, well, you know what? We've realized that y'all are mostly useless, so we're just going to kill y'all. And so this giant war breaks out between humans and AIs, and then that kicks off the rest of the Warhammer universe kind of thing. Even though it's happening, it's separate.
Right.
Um,
Well,
but
culturally, you make a great point because if you look at Skynet, Terminator series, you look
yeah,
at, um, I had another one in my head, but whenever AI is introduced as a player, or Ultron, I was going to say in the Marvel series,
yeah,
whenever AI is introduced in the player, they recognize that we're a problem,
yeah,
right? So
maybe.
I think that it's something that's built inside of us to kind of see it as an issue.
So it's great that you bring that up, right? So everybody knows that I'm a Christian, right? And one of the foundations to Christianity is that humans are fallen creatures, right? So we see ourselves as corrupted, whether you can point to numerous things, but again, in the Bible, it's about eating of the fruit of knowledge, right?
Right.
And so, could we say that it's the actual, for lack of a better term, the sin or the corruption of mankind, since we know it's going to be our own downfall? If we create something that is removed from this ancestral sin, it would once again see us as this thing that has fell, but it does not see itself as fallen. because it is trying to surpass its creator, whereas humans kind of have this feedback mechanism that I'm fallen, I can't proceed past what created me. Is that working
Yeah,
out?
yeah. So what I think you're saying is, since the AI itself will develop its own sentence and its own consciousness and its understanding of it and us, it will evaluate that difference and recognize us as fallible and
Mm-hmm.
itself as a more increased in perfection or towards the road of perfection. And maybe it feels like it would be perfect in a sense, since
Yeah.
we're living in this hypothesis, right? We
Yeah.
can survey that. I think in that case, I think you're right. I think it would look at itself as some benevolence in its existence, and that we are kind of the thorn in its side.
Yeah. Okay. I think we all kind of got that. So this is just it's terrible and sad to think about the destruction of humanity by humanity's own hands. Which I mean, it makes sense. It's an
Well,
archetype that's been in there for years, right?
yeah, I think some will see it as a destruction. I think other people would see it as an evolution, um, especially with the idea of us becoming more interconnected through our technology. Some see our phones as an extension of ourselves. I would argue that it's not, that it's actually a tool, and that
Yeah.
it's a tool that actually interfaces with us. That's what my paper is about.
Mm-hmm.
But some would say that that is, that may be what makes us an android in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, is cybernetic in process, is that we have these tools that are so closely ingrained in how we do things and how we interact with our lives that it kind of changes the very nature of humanity.
I'm so glad you brought that up. All right. So again, everybody knows my background in cybernetics and stuff like that, and especially about the control mechanisms that we have for these feedback loops, right? And so if we're looking at our phone, right? Yeah, our phones do not actually connect us. All right. So let me take a step back.
Yeah.
So I'm a Luminite, however you want to call it. So
Okay.
Niklas Luhmann, right? So he has this proposal that humans do not communicate with each other. Only communication communicates.
Mm.
And so all we're doing with a phone is we're just broadening. Wow, that must have been loud. We're just broadening the set of communicative links, but that doesn't actually make one person communicate with another any better, right? Because we're still operationally closed systems away from those we're talking about. So only those communicative strategies actually talk to each other. And then we take that output and then filter it into what we want. And then we can
Right.
output something different, right? And so that under that, guys, I completely agree that phones and all of those things, they're not actual communication devices. They're just tools that allow for the communication to be broader in spectrum. So what are your
Okay.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think symbolic interactionism is a pretty good sociological tool that we use in that sense, which is to state that how we interact is built upon means that we developed in our communication in our cultures, and through that transference of our devices, or we said our phones are just implementations of that communication. We still use the same abilities that we have. Well, if verbally talking, we use verbal, language to talk over the phone, or if we use FaceTime, we're using our, a myriad of things such as the body language, facial structures, and language as well. So, these things are all symbols though, and they all have meanings that are attached when we discuss, or, we read into these things, and that develops how we should respond, right? Um, as far as AI goes with it, AI doesn't really at this moment respond to that. So the device itself is merely, as you said, a conduit for our own discussions.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so I'm not big into symbolic interactionism. And that's again, because I don't think that we interact. So let me take a step back here. I think we interact with meaning, but the meaning can be symbolic, but the meaning is more narrative away from the symbol. So let me try to think about this. This is the hardest part about reading Lumen is trying to figure out what the hell he's saying and then try to tell other people what the hell he's saying.
Right.
So the symbolic interaction is there, but there's something deeper upon the communication stratagem. So
Mhm.
just because we get meaning from something, so we have all of the information that's getting passed from A to B, right? And then there's meaning. That is the only thing that's allowing the communications to go back and forth, because as one person says something, another person's going to interpret it, which is why only communication communicates, right?
Mhm.
And so the symbols that are being put in there, those are where we're getting the meaning, but the deeper structure is the communication founded upon double contingency, which means that there has to be some underlying shared value or underlying shared symbol. And if we don't have that, then the symbols themselves are pointless because we can't actually understand what the other partner's saying.
Right.
Um, yeah. So, all right. So we got to move to the next topic because I don't want
Sounds good.
to beat that down too far. All right. So we had talked about this Elon Musk thing. So when we're talking about Elon Musk has said some stuff about artificial intelligence and the labor market and universal basic income. Can you give me a breakdown of that?
Right. So he's releasing a robot that he wants to have in homes, wants to do basically the hard labor, the basic labor that is being done by humans at this point. And it could. I mean, you look at what they've done so far with AI in their vehicles. It's very easily, you could say that Uber drivers can be replaced by driverless cars, right? So what he claims is that there's going to be a labor shortage, and that this labor shortage drives a need for universal basic income for individuals because they won't be pushed out of the labor market.
Okay.
That's essentially
So
his stuff. Yeah.
I got two questions. All right. So one is kind of like an existential question, I guess you
Okay.
could say. So the existential question is what do you think about this, right? So is this a good thing? In my opinion, I don't know if having technology or artificial intelligence do the labor is necessarily a good thing. It may be more efficient, and it may better our lives in some regard, but I actually think it's an overall like a net negative. And the reason I say that is like we all are called to suffer in our existence of life, right? That's why, certain Christians have like this ascetic lifestyle
Mhm.
where we want to take on the suffering, right? We're called to suffer. And when you remove the suffering and the hard work, you remove all of the lessons that are associated with the hard work and stuff like that. So it may actually be to our own detriment to have these things taken away from us where we're not able to act out in the real world through our hands anymore, which is 100,000 plus years of evolution working, right? What do you think
Right.
about that?
So I think the model of interaction with the economy will change. Now, I don't know if I fully ascribe to Elon Musk's ideal picture that, and some other people too. I think there's a Sadhguru, there's another guy on the internet that actually talks a little bit about this. But they have a more colorful, more optimistic picture that humanity would be able to work on uh, human development, not business development, economic development. And that's kind of what their hope is with this universal basic income. I believe that this is my theory and hypothesizing is that if you introduce a system where we have a laborer inside the home, you have an economy where the family produces and upkeeps that labor. So, for instance, we'll say it this way: I have a robot in my house. It works for me. I send it out to do the job. It comes back home. I pay for it to be upkept, to have the energy back into it, and any repairs or anything like that that it needs to have, or any upgrades. That keeps me in the economy and keeps the economy actually moving. So for me myself, I don't see that the robot will be replacing labor. I think it just changes where the hard work will be put into.
Yeah, so I got two things when it comes on the economic side.
Yeah.
One is looking at Darren Asimoglu's work on directed technological change, right? And one of those is localized directed technological change. So, first of all, this is going to be regional, right? So, each
Yeah.
one of these things is going to be regional based on that region's absorptive capacity for technology, right? So, places like Hickory, North Carolina are going to be behind places like Charlotte, and then places like, I don't know, uh, what is it? Hoboken, New Jersey is going to be behind everyone. In fact, they're probably going to be exploded off the map because it's Hoboken, New Jersey, right? So that's the first thing. So this short run fluctuations are going to be crazy, but I think in the long run, you're absolutely right. There will be this modification to where people are going to have the human capital development where they're going to be the ones working on the AI or working on the robots and so on and so forth. Unless, and this is the problem, unless robots and all of their work become autopoetic, which to those who
Right.
don't know, that means recursively recreating itself and forwards so that it constantly evolves. So it's a contained system. It no longer needs outside or exogenous shocks, so you don't need to work on it. But we don't know how long that would be till
Yeah.
that would happen.
Yeah, I think the first step that we'd see happening as far as the replacement of workforce would actually be human on human. I think we've seen this before with other species of hominids that we've seen in history. You could argue that Homo sapien, when it came in, it cornered the market as far as evolutionary leaps and the ability to produce and to develop. And I think it was Stephen Hawking before his death. He said by 2050 there will be a new hominid, and that hominid is going to be the one that knows how to, or it takes the evolutionary leap into technology, where we'll be left as sapiens will be left behind, and we'll have to figure out what to do with Homo sapien, and much sooner than any AI problem.
You know, there's an interesting discussion that's happened in the economic growth and development literature, and it was between, I think, Dr. Tamura of Clemson. Don't quote me on this, so people don't run out and go tell Dr. Tamura that I've completely taken what he said all the way out of context. All right, this is stuff you would read off of like economic job rumors. All right. So between him, someone like Darren Asimoglu, and Tyler Cowen, right? So Tyler Cowen has like this mildly dystopian novel I have up there where he's basically saying inequality is going to become so distinct that you're going to have those who have and those who have not. And the reasoning is because human capital development is going to just basically everyone who's high in human capital development, they're just going to have everything. And if you
Right,
don't have that human capital development, there's nothing for you. Like you can't do anything. So you
right.
basically get fed the scraps from the rest of society, and we don't know what that distribution looks like. We're seeing it as technology grows, that distribution becomes more and more skewed to one side.
Right. I mean, we already have it. So, in the sense, just being naturally born, you have a distribution of resources that are unequal,
Hmm.
right? And so, by that very metric, each life experience is going to have an unequal outcome, right? We try to keep that, part of government and part of our interactions with other people is to try and do the best we can with individuals to help them have the best life possible. But I think what you're saying as well is with the increase in technology, with another resource added, that's our technology, that disparity between what you're born with and what you end up with is just all that much more greater of a hurdle to get over.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with wealth that someone's been born into and stuff like that. It could
No,
it could be cognitive differentiation and all of these things. If you read Pierre Bourdieu, it could be, social capital that could be this delineating factor and all of
right,
these things, right?
right. So yeah, when I say resources, what I mean are those type of things.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, for sure. So all right, so I guess the second thing, right? So this new breed of Homo sapiens, right? So we're kind of already in this movement towards it, right? It's a very slow, arduous journey for evolution. Now, the problem that I have, and this also goes into what Tyler Cowen says. So he also has another book called The Age of the Infovore. And basically, what the infovore is now Tyler Cowen is autistic, and he thinks that the infovore are the individuals that are subclinically or clinically autistic but still functioning. So they're high functioning people with that substructure, that systematized cognitive substructure, right? And so because they're so attuned with things like machines and coding and stuff like that, they're the ones that are going to move that precipice. And you could actually see, or you could think now that with the rise of autism, uh, some people have said, well, autism just went years and years as undiagnosed, but now we're just seeing it where we're not even sure that if it was undiagnosed or if it's this new phenomenon on top of what we already have. So could it be that the new hominid is just, I feel like 4chan's going to watch my video and take it to the extreme. Could it be that the age of the infovore, this coming revolution of knowledge and stuff, and this new hominid, is it just a bunch of autistic people?
Well, I think what we can look at is kind of this Reddit, I mean, a very dark corner of sociology that had a bad rap early on because of some bad choices and bad people. There's a social biology. And what we
Mm-hmm.
understand there is that our biology affects our social outcomes, and to a degree, right? And what we're talking about is autism, ADHD, these type of biological conditions that are affecting how we interact with society. And we're saying, is it now beneficial to be uh, autistic, ADHD, or and so we have the ability to see it, or are we expressing the genes that were always there to better fit the environment and what the social environment in which we're being placed? So I think that's what we have to figure out, and I think sociology needs to stop fearing biology. It's something that it seems to be faux pas in the science, to look at biology as well as to look at the sociology and social interactions.
Yeah, that's actually one of the big fights that's happening in cybernetics right now, right? So we've had like first order, so it's a little bit of Ashby, a little bit of Norbert Wiener, and those folks. And then second order cybernetics, kind of Parsons. Parsons was mostly first order, but a little bit of second order in the sociology. Luhmann was second order, starting to move into third order, in which, if people don't know, first order means you're observing a system. So you are an observer outside, observe a system. Second order means you're an observer inside the system, observing the system that's looking at how you're observing it, right? So it's just, man. Third order is inside the system, observing yourself, observing the system ad nauseum, right?
Yeah.
But the reasoning that this is a battleground is because, you've got people who are big fans of Luhmann, such as Dr. Ladesdorff, in his work, but he's really, really against this metabiological systematizing, right? Where we want to really separate the biology from the sociology. Um, I'm 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 a part of the metabiological group as well, because I think the the substructures, the neural nets that exist within our mind, right? They do express themselves through the different types of pressures that happen on humans when it comes to our social interactions, which is one environment, and B, our environment structures from the outside world that aren't a part of the social environment, right? So that's trees and stuff like that. All of those pressures have changed radically. And can we actually do it? Now, you said something that blew my mind, right? So I've thought about this for a while, but I never thought in the world that we could have already had that coded, and now it's expressing itself because the environment will utilize it. I think that's brilliant. And I wish I'd have thought of that, and now I hate you because
Well,
you know,
it takes a community to get the ball rolling. So I don't hate you for being smarter than me in a lot of ways either. So
right.
one thing, yeah, one thing that I'd like to talk about is with this is when we're talking about expression, we're talking about the change of genotypes and phenotypes and all these things. We can't be afraid to include them together. I think that is one of the biggest missteps. And even in basic sociology, what we learn is that there's ascribed and achieved statuses. And if we have ascribed statuses, which means those are things that we're born into, you would talk about race, gender, sex, all these intersectionalities that we talk about in sociology. You couldn't have those without expression of a biology, nature, right? So we talk about biology even when we try not to talk about biology. And so if we don't have the discussion and we don't have the studies that are empirically looking at it, we'll never actually be able to find a correct answer, I think.
I mean, I 100% agree with you, but I know that there's at least one person on Twitter absolutely shrieking. Um, yeah, no, you're 100% right. Everything does have to express. Now, again, I'm a Christian, and I'm not a like young Earth creationist at all. Like I believe in evolution, and I take evolution serious, right? And there's a good many of devout Christians that do. But the differentiation is that humans have some divine spark that separates them, right? And this can be consciousness or whatever. You can make your Jordan Peterson claim towards it as this divinity, but ultimately, the Christian says we are the unutterable image of glory that is God, and we are fallen and with scars of the fall and the stumblings that we take on our path to becoming back to what we were. So it's within reason to say that over time our goal is to become more and more God-like, right? We'll never be God, but to be God-like. Only one style of Christianity really holds on to this, and that's Orthodox Christianity, and it's called theosis. But I just wanted to slide that in there so people understood how an individual could believe in evolution and believe in transhumanism and also be a Christian, because they do coincide if you're willing to think about it hard enough. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. The metabiological statement, that's really important. Sociobiology really did get a bad rap. I don't know why. So I'm going to move back and I'm going to talk to you about role theory.
All right.
Have you ever read much of Merton's role theory?
That was a theory that was taught in my undergrad class. I understand I use uh, identity, social identity, which has role theory in it. Essentially, we're talking about actors who choose roles based on the relevance of the situation, social situation that they're placed in. And through that, they're observed and then judged on a comparator of the other individual, of what that individual thinks their role should be. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, is that pretty
yeah.
close to what you're thinking?
Yeah. So essentially, role theory is kind of, it has that in it, but role theory really differentiates itself by saying what Merton had thought is that we all have different roles that exist in our life. So we are one person, one essence, but we have multiple roles, right? So at home, I am the role of father. When I'm just with my wife, I'm the role of husband. When I'm at work, I'm the role of X. When I'm in my club, I'm role of Y. When I'm on XYZ, each one of these things, I play a different role. So
Right.
people are this multi-dimensional being that exists as one, right? So again, harken back to the Trinity and trying to understand that. So we're
Yeah.
this multi-dimensional being. Now, one of the things that I thought about is that the reasoning role theory works is because when I'm at home, I'm at home. I can separate what I am from work from when I'm at home. I can separate myself from my kids when I'm with my wife. And I can separate my work from my club to my friends, and so on and so forth. I can be all of these different things because all of them are mostly anonymous compared to the other ones. But the big problem I have with now is that I think one of the big issues facing humans when it comes to technology and artificial intelligence, you no longer have a choice to be anonymous to everyone else. And what I mean by that is at social media, there is coercive isomorphism, which means you were told to be a singular homophilic being. You're supposed to be this one person. You're supposed to agree with XYZ, the NPC meme in real life,
Mm.
because social media, if you deviate off the path from what that oneness is, then you're cast out, right? So how do we deal with that? Especially with AI being able to manipulate what we see and what we don't see.
Right. I think this is where when we talk about social events, social networks, we're talking about those moments you're talking about where you're the father. That's a different social event than when you're at work and you're the worker, right, or the boss,
Mm-hmm.
even. With social media, we have the unique opportunity and challenge that everything comes together. So your fatherhood, your work, your ecclesiastical, your theological, everything about you can be displayed at once and is displayed often and then judged based on other formal or informal actors. I was looking actually at a study of how do we do cultural fit hiring through social media. Uh, how do we use social media to do cultural fit? And we know that cultural fit's done in the hiring process, but my concern was if I have a formal actor such as HR and they're looking at the risk or the possible risk of an individual and they look at your social media site, they're going to see an informal presentation of you, not a formal presentation. So they wouldn't see you how you would be on the job. They would see you how you would be at home when you're not working. And they're making judgments based on that assumptions. So I think there is a real threat to uh, keeping these things culturally defined and separated, which I think is important if you're going to have roles.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I'm just curious, how could we interact with AI to get it to
Mm.
motivate that reasoning to where we're getting rid of this isomorphism? Because anytime something becomes oneness where homogeneity dominates, it stagnates the system itself, right?
Mhm.
Because you need differentiation. If you don't have it, then the system itself collapses in its own stagnation, right? That's why we
Right.
have humans who are progressive and we have humans that are conservative. They lead to the balance of proper level of progression.
Right.
But if we're having isomorphism and then everything becomes static, then we can no longer break that mold and we're just conservative. And that's, the death knell.
Or we're the exact opposite, right? I mean, well, I think what we've seen recently in social media is that AI has been used to effectively choose the discussion, and that's not AI's fault. That is the means and the purpose of the individuals that are coding it. And I think that's really, I think the heart of the problem that we have is that we have actors who are human who are choosing what discussions we can have, and they're using AI to effectively silence because AI is the most effective way to get around and the most efficient way to get around individuals in a virtual world.
Yeah. Again, I think that goes back to the very first part of the conversation that we had is, should we distrust the AI or should we distrust the person who's running the AI or that background?
Definitely, authority is what we should distrust, especially if they have the control to determine what the AI should be looking at. If we had just a perfect AI, then we could have the discussion of whether or not the AI was malevolent or trustful in nature, and if it could have something resemblance of trust, an emotion or an ability for it to pursue to give trust to us. We could say that it could be a trusting actor, but AI in itself at this moment is a neutral actor, right? As we discussed before in the very beginning. So we have to the only option we have is to look at the individuals that are programming it or using it in an authoritative or with their authority, with their power.
Yeah. And so that's my background, right? Is looking at networks of pressure groups, interests, and powers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's done through like network analysis, looking at I've looked at the bidirectional causality of corruption on economic growth and inequality, how those three things, because they're always talked about together, but they're never done together, which always bothered me. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first big projects that I ever did, and the second one was looking at tax structures, right? So everybody thinks tax structures come from policymakers or from people, but in reality, tax structures 9 times out of 10 come from special interest groups, right? Because they're the ones lobbying. And whether that special interest group is in favor of big oil or big tech or whatever, that's state by state. It's depending on the level of clusters that you have in your local area. Right. So if you go to whatever podunk town, right, and they're trying to do all of this new economic development, they have to give tax breaks to people so that they'll come in and give them their jobs.
Right.
Well, if I'm one of the leading businesses there, I know I need more labor. So I'm going to ask you to bring in this company, and we can work with each other. You can get some kickbacks or something. Like your cousin will be on the board of directors of my company, and you get to bring in all of these people that have this very similar job structure as I do. So now I can share with that person because they're going to import some of their human capital, and then there I can share in that. And so now we've grown our labor base, and even if I can't get all the labor I need, it can exchange some labor ideas with other companies, and I don't have to steal ideas. I can just bring in
Right.
someone and they're going to help me. And so people don't understand like how deep this level of, I guess, corruption or systematizing and all of this really goes. And so to that's really my goal, is to find these, I shouldn't say find these people because someone's going to take that as a threat. Like he's threatening
Yeah,
people.
watch
No,
out.
it's to look at this and point it out to people and be like, hey guys, did you know, one of those public service announcements.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm only going to keep you on for a few more minutes. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. You've got to be a regular guest on here
I
because
appreciate it.
AI is such a fascinating topic, and I feel like I did dominate the conversation a bit too much. I'm sure I'll get tons
Right.
of comments, all two of them. There's 5 people watching. And has anyone commented yet? No, no one's commented. That's
You got to let it rest on your mind. You can't just
right.
jump into it.
No, they need to comment
Yeah,
now.
I guess
They
so.
can
Yeah.
they can tell me my camera looks like crap because my
Oh, yeah.
my new one broke. Um,
It might just be our faces.
yeah, well, probably mine more so than yours.
Uh,
I had to shave like 3 foot of beard off. Uh, so I guess the last thing that I'm going to jump into, right? So we've talked about trust, we've talked about Musk, we've talked about UBI, we've talked about human development, we've talked about unequal outcomes, sociobiology, expressions through evolution, and we've talked about Christianity. Well, I've talked about Christianity. Um, So I guess the last thing to really talk about here is what what is what is your overall goal? What do you want to do? What impact are you making?
so my end goal, what I'd really like to do is actually implement structures in that culturalize and institutionalize proper social capital norms, so we can have a discussion not only in the real world where we have this difference between social capital will travel from the real world and you can be successful in the virtual world, but right now the virtual world capital isn't producing successful people. And this is where we're getting a lot of our studies of the individuals that are getting sucked into the metaverses or video games. I believe that through proper structuralization of the metaverse, we could actually develop strong connections and really good role-taking individuals in society in the real world, and have social capital become more equal through the distribution of virtual living.
That's interesting. That's super interesting. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
Why isn't this metaverse, like you said, games, like I'm assuming MMORPGs, right? I've read
some yeah.
some stuff that the reason that it doesn't produce anything good is I can't remember the name of it for the life of me now. But basically, because there's not an actual human to interact with, you like don't think that you're talking to humans, so you produce really bad behavior. Is that one of those things?
So I would look at game theory would be a great example of this. So when I have power and I know that the individual that I'm having power against is automatically going to concede, I don't have to play a game, right? I'm always going to win. But in the real world game theory, I have to give you credence, right? I have to let you have some power. We have to negotiate that power and the resources that we have. And so there's a back and forth. Um, I take a different route and I say, look, we've been doing internet now for 30 something years, right? And we've had procedurally individuals culturalizing other individuals, children, being culturalized by older adults on how to act online. And we've seen a degradation of communication, of the use of the English language, of our interactions through that whole process. And now we're here, and the baby boomer generations looking at the newest Gen Z millennials, and they're going, what happened? And it's because there's been a change in the way we've communicated for the last 30 years. And I would like to try and change that.
So, that is really interesting because like half of me is like, wow, that's brilliant, that makes sense, and the other half of me goes, is it the culturalization of those on the internet, or is it parts of the internet that are over stimulus, right? So the reason I say this is there's a new thing. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's super weird. They're
Yeah.
called gooners and goonettes. Have you heard anything?
That's the first time I've heard of it, but that's
Okay.
interesting. Yeah.
So basically, it's people from the ages of, I don't, I'm going to say 18, but I know it goes younger than that, to the ages of like 40, that are massively addicted to porn and that are super happy about being addicted to porn, and that they understand that they cannot function in the world because they have such an addiction to pornography. And I think when we look at the dynamics between male and female, and then that overall deterioration of those definitions and all of that, I wouldn't point to anything along the lines of like video games and stuff like that. I would point to things like pornography that create this over stimulus. There's no way to properly respond to it. It's beyond the reasoning of what human evolution could have possibly expected for us to experience. And
Mhm.
especially nowadays where people are like 7, 8 years old, and porn is so prolific that it's easy to get a hold of.
Right.
So like, to me, that seems like a something to look at more so than it is like chat rooms from back in the day, back when I was a young person on it. I just thought that communication, talking trash. In fact, this is the last bit I'm gonna make. In fact, one of the things that made me become so good at being able to articulate my speech and write well was the fact that whenever I was talking to people at 7, 8 years old, when I would go into these chat rooms, I wanted to make myself look like I was older. So there would be times where I would be sitting there trying to write stuff out, and I've gotten a thesaurus and sitting with a few friends of mine, and we're trying to like role play something. And so we're just making
Yeah.
sure that we can find as many big words. But again, that may be something that's separated.
That might have been what was the difference of your social capital compared to another individual was your ability to use a thesaurus
Yeah.
and to actually get that up there, right? So I think when we're talking about that difference, I think it's important to have a difference of there's interactions of trash talk, which is something that is around all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the interaction of what is a normal response to it in conversation, and what's normally talked about, and what are these exchanges that we're having in communication, what's normally going to be when I then transfer that to a job interview, or how do I relate that to the real world? I think that's really where individuals are having trouble.
Yeah, now that you say it like that, no, that makes sense because there's oftentimes, it used to be like social stigma. You would say something like random or something that was mildly off-putting. Now, nowadays, things are very weird.
It's a
People,
microscope on you.
right? Yeah, there's that, and then people say things that are very awkward. They're very open about things that, you know. I'm 32. I didn't talk about stuff like that when I was 21. Like that never would have dawned on me to say.
Right.
So yeah, I guess I see that there. because we will say weird stuff now in comparison to like generations, like 4 generations ago. Nobody talked like that.
Right.
No one would have said that.
And for the good and bad, I mean, if you looked at the 1950s generation, they wouldn't even talk about their household, right? So it just, and for good reasons, we have the ability to open up, and there's bad reasons that come with it when we might be oversharing.
You're right. Yeah. And that goes back to that role theory that I think we were talking about earlier, that,
Yeah.
you know, you may want to keep those roles separated because, you know, the more knowledge someone has over you, and I know this is kind of a trope, but the more power, and I use that term loosely, that they can exert on you as a person and as an individual, right? Because if I know you have a family, if I'm a Machiavellian or a psychopath, I'm going to be able to abuse that information. And I'm not saying that everyone will, but it's more likely to happen. And especially if we're at this point where we're coming into these new level of hominids, you know, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think you're onto that. I think understanding that even if we're not thinking, deviant natured or malevolent natured individuals, just the idea that we might have a family, or you might be working and you're a boss and you have someone who's a family, you may give them the opportunity to have that job, and it shapes how we interact with individuals by having knowledge about them.
Yeah, absolutely. For the better or for the worse,
Exactly.
it's up in the air. No one really knows. Because again, we've got the 2 different types of evil. We've got the malevolent, actively trying to be evil, and then we've got the banality of evil, right? Where they don't even care about you. Don't even exist in so much as you are a tool for them to go forward, right? So the Nazis.
Yeah.
Banality of evil, even though they were malevolent. But again, read Hannah Arendt if you're mad at me for saying that.
I use a C.S. Lewis approach to the good and bad, and I think that uh, all evil has a good action, but a bad way of going about it. And I think that's a very broad way of looking at it, but I've enjoyed his view of it.
Oh yeah, C.S. Lewis. You know what? There's being a Christian, I don't care what your denomination is, Protestant, Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox. You've been in a conversation with any one of these denominations, you've heard them talk about C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien. That's just the nature of those beasts. Those 2 men shaped and defined what we know about apologetics and stuff like that. And C.S. Lewis's work on chivalry changed and blew my mind. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the video. Go and look up. I think it's My Little Pony. C.S. Lewis chivalry. It's My Little Pony, which I don't know if you can see Rarity right there. I like My Little Pony, at least the older stuff, right? Not so much.
There was stuff
But
over.
yeah, it happened by accident. I was hanging out with some other snipers and we were doing some stuff and they were like, "Hey, let's watch My Little Pony." And I was like, "Oh, this is funny." And they were like,
Right.
"No, seriously, you want to watch My Little Pony?" And I was like, "This is super weird." Okay, whatever. We're going to have some whiskey and watch My Little Pony. This will be hilarious. By the end of the episode, I was like, this is fascinating. So
Every cultural expression is a window into someone's soul.
absolutely. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I think with that awesome comment, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. I really do hope we can do this more often. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I should be having, to all of the 5 people that are watching it, I should be having another interview coming up soon with a few more people. I'm going to get back to my work on corruptibles before too long. The 4th chapter is making me, slowly cheese grate my face off with aggravation, but I'm working on it. All right. Thank you so much, Dustin. You have a wonderful day and God bless you.
Thank you. Have a good one.